Hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest Ask Me Anything for Windows in the Cloud. My name is Ben Murphy, and I'm a PM on the Windows in the Cloud team focused on Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. Today, we're going to go through monitoring and insights and answer any questions that you might have about reporting or any of the experiences that you've got with trying to understand how your workloads are working or how you might make improvements. Today, I'm joined by a couple of other PMs. I'll let them introduce themselves. And Abe, let's start with you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abraham, and I'm a PM on the Windows 365 team.
Doug Coombs. I'm a PM. I'm also on the Windows 365 and AVD team with Ben and Abe.
Perfect. Now, in a bit, we're going to be joined by Anusha Reddy. She's having a few technical issues, but she will be joining us shortly. Now, as I mentioned, today we're going to talk a lot about monitoring and any of the insight options that you might be interested in. That's inclusive of things like AVD Insights. It's inclusive of things like the reporting experience for Windows 365. But to kick us off, I think we've got some interesting announcements. I'll go ahead and get us started. Our first announcement is we are going to public preview for our Cloud PC recommendation system. So what is that? It's a new report that's designed to give you some AI-driven recommendations for how to size Cloud PCs. Hey, Anusha. So in this model, what we're doing is basically trying to determine whether or not a device is the correct size for an end user. So is it too big? Is it too small? Is it just right? And cover some utilization details as well. So really specifically, what we're looking to do is give you an informed output that tells you if you want to resize a particular Cloud PC, this is what we think you should resize it to. So feel free to check it out. We'll share some links later about the announcement and documentation. But before we move into other announcements, Anusha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, this is Anusha. I'm a PM on Windows 365 team. Today we'll be sharing some new feature announcement with you all. So excited for the feature announcement.
Perfect. So to get us back on the announcement track, Doug, I think there are a couple of GAs that are coming out that maybe you could help us cover.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Windows 365, we've been working really hard to get reports for administrators to help them understand the context of their devices at a tenant level. For a long time, we've had some good information at each device that allows you to look at the device history, errors, connection performance, round trip time, those types of things. But it was difficult to see that at a tenant level. So we added two reports, one that provides information regarding connection quality and information about what may be impacting the connection quality. So we show round trip times, available throughput, both in aggregate over a time period that you're able to select, as well as for your last or current connection. In addition to that, in the connection quality report, we provide information regarding things like what gateway you're connecting to, what the IP address of the client is, if you're using UDP or not, and that might point to a configuration problem in order to improve the your performance. Then with connection reliability or Cloud PCs that aren't able to connect, we provide information about any devices that we think are currently not healthy. And we assess that in three ways. One, we're continually looking at the backend infrastructure of Windows 365 and AVD. And so if there's any systemic issue that we're aware of in a region, we will put a status saying that there's a zone state problem, which means that basically the zone that your Cloud PC is in isn't available, and you can do a point-in-time restore to attempt to move that to an alternate zone. Also, we continually monitor the health of the backend hosts. And so if there's any problem that suggests the host is unhealthy, we'll surface that. And finally, if there are any connection errors when the user attempts to connect, we'll surface those. So if the last connection of the user was unsuccessful, then that user will be included in the report along with information about the error that caused that situation. Sure, we'll have a chance to get into that in more detail, but all of those reports have been available in public preview for a little bit, and they will be moving to GA over the next about 3 weeks. Thanks, Ben.
So I think, Anusha, you might have an announcement as well.
Yep. Can you hear me? All right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Maybe less perfect.
All right. So we are bringing in a brand new feature, Cloud PC maintenance windows. This is an admin facing feature where an admin can run remote actions on a set of Cloud PCs with making sure it's less disruptive in nature to the end users. So we're trying to improve the end user experience here, as well as making sure the admin overhead is also cut down. So the admin is able to target a remote action such as a bulk resize, which is our hero system, be able to run this bulk resize on a set of Cloud PCs, making sure there is some consistent notification to the user who's currently using their Cloud PC. So if a user is online and active on their Cloud PC, they are able to see an in-session notification that gives them a heads up on upcoming maintenance activity, upcoming action that will be triggered on their Cloud PC, so they can prepare for the upcoming maintenance and also save their work. So this is going to be helpful for the admin to target as well as immediately and run them on a set of Cloud PCs. So this has been a massive feature and a big ask from the customer. Excited for it. So you should be able to see that in your prod end of this week.
Perfect. Thanks, Anusha. I think that'll
Thank
be
you.
very helpful. And I think it also sets us up for Abe. I think there is a new report coming out for information about utilization of Cloud PCs. Is that right?
That's correct, Ben. So you're referring to the utilization report. We've actually had this report in public preview for a couple of months. This month, we finally GA the utilization report. And with that, we've also added some more elements to it. For those of you that are not familiar with the utilization report, this is a report that ties into what we call the TCO story of Windows 365. That's the total cost of ownership. We want to make sure that we help our customers and endpoint admins optimize the cost of ownership for Windows 365. So with the utilization report, they're actually able to see which Cloud PCs are being underutilized, which Cloud PCs have an average length of utilization, and which Cloud PCs are being perhaps overutilized or have a high level of utilization. So this allows admins to remove licenses for those users that might not be utilizing their Cloud PC as much as they should. This can perhaps help them trigger a downsize of that Cloud PC, so downsize specific users to a lower, less performing Cloud PC with lower specs, relinquish those licenses so they can assign them to users that might want a higher power Cloud PC, and so forth. And we're adding some new elements to that utilization report. Namely, we're adding a new column that is called the Cloud PC creation date. So admins are actually able to see when the Cloud PC was initially provisioned. Because today, an admin might see that a Cloud PC has low utilization, but perhaps that Cloud PC was created last week or just a few days ago. So in order to make the experience better for the admin and to make better decisions for which licenses can be relinquished back into inventory, we've added this new column of creation date, along with all of the data that currently exists. So yep, this report is currently in GA, and more good stuff is going to come in the future as well.
Cool. Thanks, Abe. I think we've got one final Windows 365 announcement. Doug, you want to cover that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned the report for Cloud PCs that aren't available a moment ago, and that's great in providing details and allowing an administrator to proactively go in and check on those reports. Also, we have alerts that have been added for a number of areas in Windows 365. There is an alert built on top of the Cloud PCs that aren't available report. And that alert, that's in preview, that's not GA yet, but the alert is able to be configured by the administrators. And basically you can say any of those categories I talked about, meaning, is there a host problem? Is there a client problem? Is there a systemic problem? You can set that up at different thresholds. So you could say, if 10% of my devices are not able to connect based on connection errors, then I want to get an alert because I think there's a bigger issue. But if only one user is having an error, it may very well be their ISP as an example. So each customer, each administrator is going to be different in terms of what they see. Set up your own thresholds, set up who gets the alerts, and a great way to make it so you don't have to proactively go in and look at that all of the time.
Perfect. Now, to get more details about that, you can check out aka.ms/W365alerts. So I think worth checking that out. So just to recap, we've got a handful of announcements that are really targeted towards improving the total cost of ownership, TCO story for Windows 365, as well as the performance story. So we've got our Cloud PC recommendation system, which is about helping you either save money by identifying oversized devices, and if you have oversized or undersized devices, gives you advice about increasing the performance. We've also got connection quality details for the performance or the quality of somebody's connection. And we have utilization details, which coupled with the maintenance windows provides you the ability to rather seamlessly change and improve the experience for your end users. So really quick, if you have any questions, aka.ms/Windows365AMA. But with that, I think we're going to get into some of the questions that have been asked. So our first question relates to nested virtualization. It's about people who are interested in using the GUI or graphical user interface for Ubuntu, or I would apply this generically to any Linux instance that you wish to run in Hyper-V. So our recommendation here actually depends on the workload that you're going to be running in that guest system. So ideally, you're probably going to stick with maybe 4 vCPUs. I would imagine probably 16 gigs of RAM depending, but because workloads vary so significantly, it's kind of important for you to do some benchmarking. Incidentally, I think this actually ties very nicely into the Cloud PC recommendation system because you can evaluate whether the workload is actually meeting the performance needs that you've got. So as an example, if you start with a baseline, and I believe we've got some specifications out there for just like general best practices for things like development, which I would apply in this particular case, you can then evaluate whether or not the workload is undersized or is oversized for what you were working with in terms of the Cloud PC. So Cloud PC recommendations, I think, would be a good fit for that if you want to kind of continually evaluate if the workload is good. But I would check out some of our specifications for developers in particular. But it's going to depend significantly on what it is that you're trying to do. All right. So we have a question on what is the best and most efficient way to run a report for the last login or connection timestamp for Windows 365 cloud users. Doug, I think I'll let you take that.
Sounds good. So there's a couple of ways that this could be construed, the question. So I'm going to answer it in a couple of ways. I'm assuming from the question that it is known which login or which device or user is in question. So I know the user or device, and I want to see some detailed information about that. In Intune, if you go to the devices, Windows 365, and then all cloud PCs, there's a list of all of the devices and the associated users. You're able to drill into the device in that area. And then there are there's a performance tab. By the way, that performance tab is labeled preview. That is also going to be going GA in the next couple of months. And so in that performance tab, there are 2 reports. There's a connection status report and there is a connection quality report. These are an extension of the tenant level reports I talked about a second ago. So if I go into the connection status report, that will give me information as far as all of the connections that have been attempted. And if any of those connections had a failure, then that connection will show up in that report as having a failure. We don't show every connection because there could be thousands and thousands of them. But if there was ever a problem with a connection, then we will show that, like I said, there was a connection error and what the error was associated with that connection. We'll show that in great detail for the device, every error that occurred with that connection. Also, if you go into the connection quality report, in that report, we have details as far as the round trip time for the connection. We have trends in over time for that specific device, round trip times across timeframes and so forth. And also, if there is a long round trip time, then we surface more details about that around that time. So let's say that I know that at 10 o'clock a.m., I have a user who is indicated they had a performance problem, then we will start publishing information there. Instead of at an aggregate level, we'll provide information every 2 minutes to show what the connection quality was in terms of round trip time for the networking there. So that's one, assuming that you know the device, then that would be how you would go about doing that. If we're asking at a tenant level what all of my connections look like, there is not a great way today to see every single connection if there are no errors. If you're looking for error activity, then that is something that you would look in the Cloud PCs that can't connect report. And in that report, all of the devices that have had errors in, the last connection had an error will show up there. And also we do have active work to surface more information about every connection, the outcome of that connection, as well as some context about that, meaning, where is the host, what is the client, what is the host stack, and so forth. So look for those reports upcoming in the next few months into preview that will allow a lot more detail around that at a tenant level. But again, all of it is available already for the device if you're aware of the device. So thank you, Ben.
Perfect. So I see we've got another question. This one is about Windows 365 Frontline. Does the utilization report also work for shared PCs at the device level, or is it per user? Then once I see the info, how do I set alerts to make sure we don't exceed our max? Abe, is that something you could answer?
Yeah, I can talk about that in the context of the utilization report. So the utilization report works both for enterprise as well as frontline cloud PCs. So if you have a tenant in which you provision enterprise and frontline cloud PCs, the utilization report will reflect that. I think the second part of the question is can it be shown by user? Yes, the utilization report shows who is the primary user of that cloud PC. So that's definitely something that can be leveraged there. In terms of alerting, Doug, is that something that you want to take on?
Sure. So the alerts are evolving for Frontline, and also there's Frontline functionality that's continually evolving right now. It's a relatively new feature. So there are absolutely alerts that you can configure in terms of the thresholds. So if you're interested, for instance, in utilization, I want to know when I'm within 20% of utilizing all of my cloud PCs, then you can go in, look at that alert, set the thresholds for your desired level, and then you'll be alerted when your cloud PCs get to, when your utilization gets to that point. And if you desire, take action, meaning, get additional cloud PC licenses or frontline licenses.
Perfect. Cool. So I think at this point, let me mention that we have not forgotten Azure Virtual Desktop. So one other announcement that we've got is Azure Virtual Desktop Insights is introducing a new connection reliability tab. So in light of some of the conversation we had earlier about connection quality, the intent behind this new public preview tab is to give you insight into when disconnect events are happening and the underlying cause. So be on the lookout for that to roll out this week, and again, openly available for all users of AVD Insights. So we've got another question. We've got Windows 365 service outage alerts. Where can we see those? Doug, can you take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, there are a few infrastructure alerts that may go out. For instance, if we know that there is a problem with the brokers, gateways, the underlying AVD infrastructure, or related services. Super, super rare, just FYI. These are very, very highly available services, but those would go out through standard Intune communications. The specific item I mentioned around a zone problem in a region is in the Cloud PCs that can't connect. There's a column that says system status. That status will show if we're aware of any systemic problems. And right now, the problem that shows up there is if there's a zone problem. So in other words, if any zone we recognize as unhealthy for Cloud PCs, that could be any core service for a Cloud PC in that zone, then that zone will show a zone status, and you can look for additional communications in Intune. Additionally, moving forward, we'll be adding more system statuses. So if we recognize that there are, things like, and these are already available other places, but just to bring them together in one place, things like if your Azure Network Connect configuration or the underlying infrastructure in your Azure Network Connect is failing for some reason, we'll look to surface that in the system status because that would impact the connectability of those Cloud PCs. And also, as we move forward with better diagnostics around region level problems for Cloud PCs. So certainly Azure knows if there's a problem with the region, but for us to understand all of the detailed services required for Windows 365 here in the near future, we'll be surfacing that as well. Similar to zone state, we'll be adding a region state, so that you can know that there's a region problem, and then again, go look for comms and Intune and so forth. So that's where it's, those are the places where it's found. It's not just one place, it's all of those places.
Perfect. All right. So again, feel free to ask any questions about Windows 365 or Azure Virtual Desktop monitoring. I think we do have a question about Cloud PC recommendations. So I mentioned we're introducing this public preview to provide recommendations about Cloud PCs. How frequently are the recommendations updated, and what are they based on? So our recommendations are updated on a daily basis. We have a model that aggregates performance information from the Cloud PCs. This is primarily compute resource and memory to start with, but that model will evolve over time. One thing to note, and I think this is fairly important, you don't actually have to configure anything for this. All this stuff is just out of the box. So that Cloud PC recommendation output will just be present for you once it flights to your particular area, which should be pretty soon. Cool. So let's see. I think we've got another question. How can we monitor compliance for Cloud PCs that may have been offline for a bit and need to be updated or synced? Anyone want to take that?
I can talk about that for a minute. So and this goes back to kind of what we talked about, I think, if I understand the specific ask of the question. I think what's being asked is that if there's a Cloud PC that has a problem, when we say offline, I'm assuming that we're saying that the host has been offline, that the host has a problem. If that is true, then in the Cloud PCs that aren't available report, we run a number of health checks. Those health checks run all of the time. If there's a host that is offline, it will show up in that health check. And there are a number of things you could do there. As an administrator, you would be able to go in, you can restart that Cloud PC, which is probably the lowest lift, because when you restart the Cloud PC, all it is a reboot of the VM. You could also run the Windows 365 troubleshooter. The troubleshooter looks for all kinds of problems. Things like, is the side-by-side stack complete? Is it up to date? Is the machine successfully joined to the domain, and so forth. And in addition to identifying the problem, the troubleshooter is designed to resolve the problem. So let's say, just as an example, I find that my side-by-side stack is out of date, or that there's a component missing. The troubleshooter will reinstall that and restart your Cloud PC. So, and then, as I mentioned before, in a substantial problem. So let's say that there is your Cloud PC is offline, and sorry, I'm jumping around a bit because I'm thinking about more things. But your Cloud PC could be offline because of another type of problem. And an example I'll give, although it's extreme, is, let's say that you have a user that has administrative permissions on the device, and they change the IP network address and they make it something that is untenable. If they were to do that, then there's no way for them to connect to their cloud PC, and essentially, that cloud PC is unavailable at that point. So in that case, you could go back and you could re-provision the cloud PC, but that's pretty drastic. You can also use point-in-time restore to go back to a point before that damage was caused. So if you know that this cloud PC was available at a certain time, but then it became unavailable like a day ago, you could do a point-in-time restore to try to resolve that as well. So this is what I would do in terms of looking at a specific device that has been offline and I know there's a problem. First, I would try to restart it. Next, I would run the troubleshooter. Or if I knew that there was a problem that occurred at a specific point and I have an idea that it might have been something caused by maybe a Windows update that failed, or a user action, or an administrative workload that maybe wasn't ideal, then I would do a point-in-time restore. And as an absolute last resort, I would possibly re-provision that device. I'd probably do a support ticket before I did a re-provision, though, unless a re-provision is lightweight for your particular organization. If that didn't cover what the question was intended for, please feel free to ask another detailed question. Thanks,
Sure.
Ben.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that, to me, covered the spirit of it, Joe. Just to recap, too, I think if you're monitoring for when devices have been offline, there are a few areas in Intune where you can see kind of a last connected date. So we have utilization reports. We've got the actual core cloud PC device area where you can see that as well. Now, in terms of compliance, because that could mean a few different things in a few different contexts, one other thing that I'll mention is in Intune, you do have, for Intune managed devices, a native representation of compliance for other policies that you've set. So, for the sake of argument, that could be security policies or updates or packages that you're propagating out, whatever it happens to be, that also would apply. And I think, Abe, maybe also one other thing we can talk about is compliance for provisioning policies.
Yeah. So as you said, Ben, compliance can mean a lot of things, and there's different ways that you can check compliance in Intune. With respect to the provisioning policy itself, if there is a change that's made to the provisioning policy and you want to propagate that change to all of the cloud PCs that have been provisioned with said provisioning policy, then you can do so today by applying the change in the provisioning policy itself. So what you'll see today, let's take the example of changing the region or the geography of the cloud PC. Once that is done, the change doesn't take place automatically. The admin actually has to go and apply the change in the provisioning policy. So perhaps I might have changed the region from west to east US. That change will not propagate until the admin actually applies the change into the provisioning policy. There could also be another change, like, for example, the connectivity of the cloud PC, whether it's hybrid AD join or Entra, I suppose, or fully AD join cloud PC or Entra join cloud PC. The only way to propagate those changes is to actually reprovision the cloud PCs today. So if you were to change the join type of that provisioning policy, then you have to reprovision all of the cloud PCs in that provisioning policy. And now you can actually do a bulk reprovision of all of your cloud PCs, and you can target specific AD groups if you want, so you don't have to pick individual devices anymore as you used to before. That's actually a new optimization that we've made to our device management capabilities for Windows 365. So hopefully that covers some of the questions onto like how to get devices back into compliance, because compliance is very broad. So hopefully that answers part of that.
Perfect. Thanks, Abe. I think that additional context is very useful. We do have another question. So folks are excited about AVD for Azure Stack HCI, as am I. So if we use HCI for a set of AVD host pools, but not for others, is there a report that allows me to easily see my ratio of HCI to regular host pools at a glance? Now, that's an interesting question. In AVD Insights, we do have things broken out on a per host pool basis. And in some views, as an example like utilization, description, we do have some details about activities split out by host pool, like concurrent sessions and things like that. However, I don't think there's a view that specifically provides you a ratio of HCI to, AVD classic, so to speak. So if that's of interest to you, maybe that's something that we could explore. Otherwise, what you might consider doing is taking one of the default AVD Insights views. As an example, we have an overview page where we break out capacity and session activity, and then maybe doing some repurposing there. I think we're always happy to provide guidance on that as well. But to the question, there's nothing I think that specifically lets you see that kind of a ratio, just because it's not. It's more designed to pivot around like host pools. Cool. So we have another question. Copilot, can I use that to pull insights on my cloud PCs, and what kind of data? So I will answer part of that. For the moment, we have quite a few different Copilot offerings, so it's difficult to kind of narrow down the scope to a particular set. Now, one thing that specifically I think is relevant to this case is Copilot in Intune, which we have announced a public preview for, actually coming up fairly shortly, I believe next week. So with that offering, they have some troubleshooting and some policy analysis components that actually would provide you the ability, much like for any other Windows managed device or Intune managed device, to get data about those. So that includes device summarization, error code summarization, things like that. Now, I can't get too specific about future functionality, but there will be some developments on the Copilot front that are unique to cloud PCs and, in fact, also to AVD in the future. But I'll keep that to generalities for now. So for the moment, if you go to aka.ms/Copilot in Intune, that'll give you a breakdown of what the existing planned public preview functionality is for Intune, and there will be some expansion to that in the future. Cool. All right, so let's see. Abe, do you have any other updates about, maybe as an example, some of our, well, the fascinating world of cloud agreements?
Yeah. So to kind of expand on the discussion that we were having on TCO, utilization, and so forth, Windows 365 is a service that transacts in two different channels. So there might be big enterprise customers that purchase through your legacy enterprise agreements, and there might also be customers that are ready for a more modern purchasing experience, and they might transact licenses through what's called a Microsoft Cloud Agreement, or MCA. So that's modern commerce. We are making improvements through both purchasing channels in terms of the flexibility that we're providing for our customers. So for customers that are transacting on enterprise legacy agreements, last year we launched a set of 13 step-up licenses, as we call them, which would allow our customers to convert licenses in their inventory from SKU A to SKU B without having to wait for that enterprise agreement to expire to be renewed, which only happens once a year. So we're providing customers with enterprise agreements much more flexibility in how they can purchase and convert licenses. That is on the legacy front. On the modern front, for our customers that transact through Microsoft Cloud agreements, we're actually making the experience much more seamless by allowing them to convert licenses. This is what's called a midterm upgrade through the Microsoft Admin Center, which is much more direct and much more frictionless. You don't have to reach out to your sales specialist. The customer can actually do that themselves. So they'll be able to perhaps purchase a 2-core license in 1 month, and at the end of that month, if the subscription length is only 1 month, they could convert that license to a 4-core license. So they don't have to own that 2-core license for an entire year, like a lot of legacy agreements require the customer to do. So that's a very exciting new functionality and improvement that is going to land sometime later this year, definitely, and hopefully before the end of the fiscal year. So look forward to future announcements on that later on.
Perfect. Thanks, Abe. Now, to circle back to the Copilot topic as well, I'm aware of the fact that there are kind of multiple flavors that are targeted at different personas. So we've got what I would say features that are more targeted at the IT administrator level. That's stuff like the Copilot in Intune or our Copilot for Security offering, both of which have some kind of Intune flavors to them. Then there are end user Copilots as well. So just as kind of a reminder slash, I think, important thing to note, the Copilot experiences that are resident in Windows, like Windows Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot, all are fully functional on Windows 365 and AVD as far as that's concerned. So all that stuff functions, some of which is aware of the context of execution, meaning like where it is, like what type of device it is, some of which is not. But worth mentioning that if you'd like to unlock those Copilot experiences, Windows 365 AVD is a great fit for that. So, Anusha, I think you might have some updates also on the utilization report and some additional characteristics that you can use to get some insights there.
Absolutely. I thought there was a question earlier asking about frontline utilization. So the Cloud PC utilization report currently has a PC type filter, which lets you look at utilization information, the date last connected, and also the number of hours you've been connected to your Cloud PC, and that kind of information for both enterprise and frontline. And also there are specific alerting that you can set for making sure you're hitting that max concurrency limit. Do you need to purchase more licenses because you're right at the threshold? And what Doug mentioned, that you're able to flexibly change your thresholds there for frontline, and that alerting is for hitting that max concurrency limit. And I think Abe can also expand on the concurrency limit report that's available for frontline. Abe, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Anusha. So another area where we're also making improvements is in concurrency. So for those customers that are leveraging the frontline, the Windows 365 frontline offering, they monitor concurrency, which means the maximum number of devices that can be connected at any one time through the Windows 365 concurrency report, which is also called Cloud PCs that are currently connected in my tenant. So we are going to make improvements to show if you reach max concurrency, which will also at some point be tied to alerting. So if you reach max concurrency, we want to make sure that our admins know and that they can take specific actions, such as turning off a set of Cloud PCs to lower their concurrency and allow their following shift employees or frontline workers to connect to their respective Cloud PCs. There will also be an upgrade known as the shift buffer. So this is a little bit newer and still in development, but coming very, very soon, which will actually allow customers to go above their maximum concurrency. So we acknowledge that there might be a very specific timing window in which frontline workers transition from one shift to another. And we want to provide a level of flexibility to allow that transition to happen very smoothly. So the shift buffer is going to allow that by allowing customers to go above their maximum concurrency. So go above the maximum number of Cloud PCs that can be connected at any single time to allow for a smooth transition between shift workers. So that's functionality that's going to be coming very soon as well. So look forward to more announcements on that as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Abe and Anusha. I think that's very interesting on the utilization front. Now, incidentally, Doug, you were talking earlier about troubleshooting steps and how you can get insight into resolving problems for Cloud PCs. So we've gotten a new question. We're just trying out Windows 365. One of my users called in this morning and said they can't access their Cloud PC. Where do I go to start triaging the problem? I think that relates directly to that topic. So Doug, if you could tackle that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does relate exactly to what I was talking about earlier. So in this case, again, we know the exact user, and so we know the device. In Intune, that is exactly where we would use the connection report that I mentioned before. So that's in Devices, Windows 365, all Cloud PCs. There's a list of all the Cloud PCs. And by clicking on the Cloud PC associated with that question or with that user, you would be able to go in and see all of the connection attempts that have failed. So you would see that there was a connection attempt that failed, and there is an error that's associated with that. And then to take that into like a larger context, you'll also see in that exact same report and in chronological order if the host has any problems and what those host problems are. So generally, and I'm going to equate this back to the tenant in a second as well. In Windows 365, there are kind of three places that you can have a problem, broad places. There may be a problem with infrastructure in Windows 365, super rare, but possible. You can have a specific host problem, meaning that your host is unhealthy, or you can have something outside of your Windows 365 system, most likely with either the user's client or the user's network. And so the way to troubleshoot that is you go in, you look at the connection error, and the connection error will give you information in terms of what the problem was, whether it was a network problem. If, as an example, you may get a connection terminated unexpectedly with your host being healthy. And so to close out on that very specific question, go into Windows 365 devices, look at the connection history for that device, and all of the connections will show up there. In general, when you're troubleshooting Windows 365 for your entire tenant, you have the three columns I mentioned before. So you have systemic problems, host problems, and then connection errors. If you see a connection error and the host is showing healthy and the there's no system problems, then you look at that connection error, and most likely that connection error is going to point you to something either on the client or in the network, and then you can start to work with the user to troubleshoot their client and network. I can jump into that a little bit more in a minute, but Ben, I see that there are a number of questions that have come in. So let me pause there, but if I don't want to jump on people's questions. If we end up with time, I can go a little bit deeper into each of those areas in a minute.
Perfect. Yeah, that would be great. So I think one of the things that is worth mentioning is we have this similar concept of triage and troubleshooting for Azure Virtual Desktop session hosts as well. So one thing I'll mention is very similarly to how what Doug outlined is kind of like what I would call the three legs of the problem, which is, broadly networking stuff that exists on one side of the service layer itself, and then the session host. We've got some very similar troubleshooting functionality and triaging functionality in Azure Virtual Desktop Insights. So for connection reliability, for example, we've got this new public preview functionality that looks at mass disconnect events, examines the overall ability for people to connect. There's a connection diagnostics area. And then really critically, and this is actually true for Cloud PCs and for AVD as well, resource performance characteristics for things like compute resource, memory, disk, that allow you to get insight into, is a session host overtaxed? So we've got some use cases on how to identify, like, have you over provisioned an AVD session host, especially in a multi-session scenario. A lot of that can be workload related. So in general, and this has a tendency to apply more in the AVD case with lots of users, it can be very interesting to understand what the ramifications are of things like application workload. So I would point out AVD Insights for that. And just as an additional shout out, we've got the Cloud PC recommendation component for the Cloud PC element, and that can help identify if performance problems are related to the size of a Cloud PC, which I think is another important thing for us to try and sort out. Now, got another question, and Anusha, I think this one's for you. Let's talk about maintenance windows. Where do I schedule and monitor those?
That's a great question. Yeah, I thought it was really brief in the beginning. So I'll dive into some functionality and where to schedule. So this is an admin-facing feature, as I mentioned before. So this is for an admin to be able to define and create those specific time frame you want to be able to run this remote action on a group of Cloud PCs. So this is lives within the tenant administration on Intune. So if you go to tenant admin, you will be able to see as a tenant all the maintenance windows that is scheduled for your tenant. So this is my executive group maintenance windows. This is a maintenance windows for my test group or engineering group or whatever the group that you might have created, you might have defined a maintenance windows for. So you will be able to create that. It's a wizard that kind of takes you through the process, and you can specify the name of your maintenance window, a description, and the timings. You can do a weekend schedule or a weekday schedule. So there's a lot of flexibility for the admin, because the admin knows the tenant really well, the users, when are they active, and what's the best time to actually roll out these changes onto the cloud PCs. So that's where it's more flexible. You can also set the notification period, that when you want the specific notification to show up on the end user cloud PC, so that they can actually prepare for it, they can plan for it. And also there is no defer option as of today, but definitely that's coming, and we'll be able to defer to a later time and postpone, just like our Windows update notifications that come on our PCs today. So you'll be able to define in tenant administration, and also be able to see the resultant maintenance windows in the cloud PC device action blade. And as I mentioned, this is for the bulk resize action as our V1 scenario. So if you'll be able to see the resize action scheduled if it's associated with the maintenance window within that blade. So it gives you a heads up, and as well as shows you that all the maintenance windows for your tenant in the tenant level view. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Anusha. So let's see. I think we've got a question that I think I know the answer to, but I'm going to caveat this with I am only marginally certain I know the answer. So we'll see how this goes. So folks are interested in looking to implement media optimization for new teams on AVD. How do you verify that this is working? So they've installed the latest version of Teams, RTC, but I don't know where to look for confirmation that it's working. Now, this, and I'm trying to keep myself honest here, I think is resident in some of the diagnostic output that we've got. So in general, there are two places that you can look. On the session host itself, you can validate that there's a registry key that's present. You can either do that individually or in the aggregate with the Azure Monitor agent. If you choose to do that, there's a DCR option for collecting those things. Or now I think the more material part of this is, are we actually using the optimizations? This gets a little bit into the weeds. And unfortunately, I don't know off the top of my head if we actually visualize this anywhere, but certainly something to consider. In the WVD checkpoints, which is the AVD diagnostic setting for checkpoints, if you have that enabled on a per host pool basis, I believe if you have the Teams media optimization present, when that optimization is in use, you should see a checkpoint entry in those logs. That gets a little bit complicated maybe, but that's something that you can do in log analytics. Now, it's worth considering, I think, if we want to add that to, let's say, AVD Insights, but you should be able to get that information out through the checkpoint entries. That'll be one of the properties that you see. Maybe a more kind of complicated question for us to get into, but if you have questions about custo querying or things like that, I think there are some resources out there for it. So I would start that. Let's see. Okay, so we have a question. Is the vision to increase reporting for Windows 365 and rely less on Graph? So I think I can start us off with kind of maybe some vision, and then I don't know, Doug, if I could pass it off to you for maybe some expansion there. So I think in general, yeah, we are looking to expand our reporting story for Windows 365. I'm not going to speak for the future roadmap for Intune, but I think there are some thoughts around how, in general, there might be some improvements for the reporting experience for Windows devices or just managed devices. But for Windows 365 in particular, we are looking to expand our set of reports. And we're certainly, I think, interested in getting feedback about how people want that experience to look. as far as that's concerned, very similar for AVD. But yeah, I think in general, we would like to provide a kind of meaningful and easy to use reporting interface that does not depend on harvesting data through graph, although that is a very good option if you're comfortable with it and want to prepare some data on your own. But Doug, I think in terms of vision, let me pass it off to you because I think you might have some thoughts there.
Yeah, sounds good. So we definitely have some short-term work in terms of surfacing more information within the UX models and patterns that we already have. So specifically looking to surface more contextual information, as I mentioned before, around each event, the user, the device associated with that event in terms of a connectivity event, and then also configuration information. So what is the client being used? What is the so client OS, client version, those types of things. And then also some trended data. So for instance, looking across the timeline, I can see things like how often is UDP used for every client. Right now, that's available only in terms of the quality report. So if you don't have quality problems, then you don't see that. Or some of this is also available in the can't connect report. So if everything is healthy, you're not able to see those important things around configuration and so forth. We're also looking at adding things like what is the user setting for a specific device, provisioning profile, host region, all of those configuration things. All of these are short-term things to surface information in the current user interface. And then, as Ben mentioned, I think that going forward, certainly we have things that we're talking about and intend to extend the experience around data analytics, reporting, and so forth. But as an evolutionary step, just providing the data is a short-term target that we have.
Perfect. Well, with that, I think we are about ready to wrap up. So everyone, thanks so much for your questions. Really appreciate it. At this point, I think each of us, we can share maybe some final thoughts or any insights that you think might be kind of good to wrap up on. Personally, one point that I'd like to just remind folks of is that we are launching to public preview a couple of new features that I think people will find interesting. In the Windows 365 space, the Cloud PC recommendation feature, which is our first AI-powered feature, is launching actually now. So you should be able to see that in your Cloud PC overview area. Again, just a recommendation system to give you an idea of, is a device the right size? On the AVD front, we are also launching our connection reliability tab for AVD Insights. And again, the intent is to try and cover, are users able to connect, and are there any issues with mass disconnect events or anything like that, which you can then troubleshoot and understand through that tab. So with that, I'll pass it off to Abe.
Yeah, in terms of reporting, I'll also like to highlight the Cloud PC Action Status Report. So this is a report that went in public preview a few months ago. It allows our endpoint admins to see any Windows 365 specific device management actions that have been taken on Cloud PCs. And it actually allows them to see what's the status of that action. Is it currently ongoing? Did it fail for whatever reason? Is there an action that I can take, or did it complete successfully? So nowadays that report displays an entire list of Cloud PCs. So single action per action report. We're actually making optimizations in the next few months to show entire batches of Cloud PCs. So if you took an action on, let's say, 1,000 Cloud PCs, you'll actually be able to see what is the status of that entire batch. Like, is it 50% done? Is it 80% done? Is it fully done? How long did it take to complete the entire batch of actions? So we're making a lot of exciting improvements to that report to tie into the device management experience of Windows 365. So look forward to that in later months.
Perfect. Anusha?
Yeah, all the features and functionality we shared today, I think it's mostly how we can, increase the end user experience and also reduce the administrative overhead. So how we can make that admin task more easier and more efficient. And personally, to me, maintenance windows is a great feature for the admin be able to define and target specific actions to the cloud PCs. So we are coming up with this functionality in public preview by end of this month, and more exciting improvements will come to that, and Abe will be taking over that area, and I'm excited for more coming to that area. So please do try out and share your feedback. I think it's a great feature to be able to evolve going forward. Thank you.
Perfect. And Doug, before I pass it to you, just a quick reminder, if you do have feedback, feel free to submit that at aka.ms/W365feedback. But Doug, final thoughts?
Reiterate the feedback. Please reach out to us on the feedback. It's so important for us as PMs, and just absolute gold. I think I'm just going to bang the drum one more time on in terms of troubleshooting, really in terms of kind of the 90-10 rule or even 95-5 rule. Most of the times that we hear questions around reporting, it's around I have a user that can't connect, or I'm curious about my connectivity experience. And I hope everyone has a chance to go in and check out these new reports that are going GA to see the connection quality at the tenant level and any devices that can't connect. And then, as I mentioned, there are some really good ways to troubleshoot through that just by segmenting and looking at the specific devices. There's always great opportunities for us to improve in terms of surfacing information, and we're absolutely looking to do that. And we'll continue to do that. But if there's a problem with connecting, there's a lot of information available. And please don't forget to set up the alerts. When we talk about total cost of ownership, it is so important to make it so that you don't have to sit there and monitor the environment. So alerts are your friends. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Doug. And yeah, let me just reemphasize that question on alerting. Very important for Windows 365. Also very interesting for AVD. It's very helpful to have proactive awareness of things. And in general, things like connectivity, session host performance, or capacity limits, all of those things are very useful to know about in advance, rather than kind of taking a reactive model. So again, let me thank everyone for your time. And Abe, Anusha, Doug, thank you very much for joining us here. This has been Monitoring and Insights. And again, just kind of generally recap, we've covered some interesting functionality about how you can troubleshoot cloud PCs and AVD devices, how you can understand your TCO and total cost of ownership. And in general, hopefully we've answered some questions about how you can best monitor and understand what's happening in your environment. So with that, thanks for your questions today. Really appreciate it. We'll be back April the 17th with another AMA. So please visit aka.ms/AMA/Windows in the cloud for details. And with that, good morning, good evening, and good night. I will catch you next time. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.